As you're starting your playthrough with Atelier Yumia, I wanted to provide you some tips and tricks that you need to know that are going to help you throughout your journey. If you haven't bought the game or you want more of a detailed review, feel free to check out this video right here, but without further ado, let's get into the first tip. Now for my first tip, I'm going to really recommend that you guys get more items ASAP. The game walks you through one, but I feel like they don't put a heavy emphasis on how important these are, and these are going to make combat feel less clunky. So when you first start out, the game is going to walk you through making a luft, but I really recommend that you make all of these because these are going to make combat much more fluid, especially in the beginning of the game where things can be a little bit clunky because you don't have all of your skills unlocked. Now, this is going to be useful for several reasons, but first things first is that I'm decently leveled up, so I have a good bit of skills, but you're probably going to be starting with 2 or 3. And you're going to be able to weave these different items into combat, and so they're not used like items in your traditional game. They're actually going to be able to be used as abilities, and so the more you have, the more variety and the option of abilities you have to dish out damage, especially in the early game where you may be limited on the amount of actions that you can use. Now, as for the second tip, this is really going to coincide with tip 1, but I'm going to recommend that you come to the skill tree and you unlock the friend action as soon as you can. You're going to be able to get it for 150 skill points, and this is going to help you out significantly when you're in combat. Now, essentially what a friend action does is that when you enter combat and you're able to get an enemy stunned, so let me just get this enemy stunned for you guys so I can explain it. So now that the enemy's stunned, I'm going to be able to take advantage of his weakness, and you see with number 2 I can use my Mirage Sword, which is going to trigger the friend action. Now you can continue investing in the skill tree, and that's going to allow it to be available more frequently, but as long as you unlock that first option, whenever you stun an enemy, you're going to be able to weave to your item and exploit its weakness. As long as you have an item equipped, it's going to be able to exploit the enemy's weakness. This is going to deal a lot more damage and increase your damage output, especially if you're having trouble with combat, and it's going to make things feel more fluid. So 1 and 2, those tips really go together because you're going to want to get as many items as you can equipped, so that way you can take advantage of as many weaknesses as possible. I feel like calling this an item makes us kind of have that mindset that it's going to be a consumable or a one-time use, but these two are going to go hand in hand for dealing a ton of damage. If you haven't already, I really would appreciate it if you help me get this video to 100 likes and consider subscribing to the channel. But now that you've taken care of that, let's get into the next tip. Tip number 3 is going to be regarding synthesis. So probably early on in the game, especially if you're new to the series, you're going to be depending a lot on this auto add mechanic. And so when you're auto adding things, it's going to put everything in there for you, and I chose it to prioritize quality. And so when it does that, it's going to activate all of the trait cores and do everything I can to maximize quality. So we can see that all of these are activated, but one thing you want to pay attention to is going to be the specific details. I know that this happens a lot with the alchemy core. In order to activate this specific core, you're going to have an ingot in your party, or excuse me, in your inventory. So we see right here, I do have the ingredient to activate it with this ingot right here, but this is actually going to be something you're going to have to craft. And so if you were to use the auto add feature without having this ingot crafted, your trait for the alchemy core is going to be deactivated, and you're going to lose out on a chance to get a lot of quality by having this extra core activated. So when I first started playing, I found myself doing the auto add and not paying attention, and I was missing out on quality, all because of the simple fact that I didn't craft an ingot. Once you craft an ingot, that should get you taken care of. So I say with this specific tip, just make sure that you shuffle through all of the cores and make sure that you have the ones that you needed to be activated, and especially make sure that it's not something as simple as an ingot missing that you can just pop out here and craft easily, so that way you can increase the quality much more. So right here we see we have the different ingots that you can craft, but this is a tip that I really recommend paying attention to so you don't miss out on quality. With tip number 4, I've tried to pair these tips together, so 1 and 2 are paired together, 3 and 4 are similarly paired together. But when you come to the recipe recall station, when you're looking at some of these recipes, they may not be unlocked, and there may be things that are holding you back from unlocking them. Now, some of these things are going to be things you have to go out into the field and gather, but some of these are just going to be craftable things that you can do. So for this specific weapon right here, this is going to be Yumia's 3rd weapon. This was locked for me until I found the internal crystal in the wild and the besmuthinine, I don't know how to say that, but I found that in the wild. But I could have unlocked this recipe a lot earlier had I noticed that that was actually something that I can craft as a synthesis material. So I don't have this recipe unlocked yet, but I could have unlocked this, crafted it, and I would have had access to Yumia's third weapon a lot sooner. So that's going to be tip number 4. Pay attention to the items that you need for these recall recipes, and make sure these aren't things that you can just craft, because you could be hindering yourself expecting to find those out in the wild when you could have just popped in here, synthesized it, bada boom, bada bing, you have it ready to be created. The next tip that I have for you is going to be following these blue trails when you see them, because these materials are going to be needed to level up your recipes. Honestly, I really just walked around mashing the button that I used to gather, because there have been times where I just randomly started doing the animation for the fact that I found one of these when I wasn't even paying attention. And also, when you see the red trails, don't be afraid to take on those monster challenges. I know that in most games, these are things that you're going to come back to at the end when you're finished or you're over leveled or leveled up to take them on. But with Atelier Yumia, a lot of these are going to be very doable, and they're going to give you a ton of resources, such as the things you need to level up your recipes. So we can see in here that in order for me to level these up, I have to have the particles required, and you're going to get a lot of those particles from following those blue trails as you run into them. So it may seem like a distraction that you don't want to waste time with, but I really recommend doing them, so that way when you get into leveling up your recipes, you're going to be able to craft stronger weapons. And this is going to be a list of some of the particles that you're going to retrieve from interacting with those blue trails and taking on those monster challenges. This is going to be very useful though, because for my equipment, I was able to get this to level 7, but I wouldn't have been able to do that if I wasn't collecting those particles. And this made my mana scepter so much stronger because I'm able to craft a higher quality version of it. And as I level it up, you're going to see things like the add slot at level 5 and level 6 increased base resonance count. This is going to be things that's going to make the synthesis much stronger, that you're only going to have access to by leveling it up. If I were to try and synthesize the latest weapon that I have unlocked, the quality is not going to be as strong and as high as this last one, because it's only at level 3 and I haven't unlocked that add slot at level 5 or the increased base resonance count at level 6. And the last thing you're going to want to do is be hindered by particle requirements because you weren't following those blue streams and taking on those monster challenges. Tip number 6 is going to be going into your inventory and equipping these training wrist weights. Now, I believe these were in my inventory by default. I had 3 of them, so I was able to equip them without even crafting anything to the base 3 characters, and these made sure that my party was constantly leveling up. I know that like eventually I'm gonna swap these out for gear as things get more difficult, but for the early game, this was very helpful in making me be over leveled and just be strong for where I was at. And especially when the game is giving it to you by default. Now, the ones by default aren't going to have these trait equipment crystal slots, so this could be a reason for you to craft more of them, so that way you can still take advantage of the traits. But the ones that they give you at the beginning, I think I have them equipped to my other characters that I'm not using. They don't come with those slots, but you're going to want to take advantage of these, at least until you find yourself hitting that first challenge where you're like, okay, I need to go in and make some changes and equip some more gear. Tip number 7 is going to be regarding the different weapons. So at the start of the game, I really didn't want to invest a lot in the beginner's weapon because I assumed that I would get another one. So I didn't waste, I was scared to at least use my particles leveling up this weapon. And from what I've found so far, it looks like you're going to unlock a new weapon for each region that you unlock. So as you transition into a new region, you gather the resources, you're going to be able to unlock the weapon for that region. And now one of the resources is going to be something you're going to have to find in the wild, and that's going to usually be that top one. But this bottom one, like the violet earths and the one that we referred to earlier, the besmuthin, these are going to be things that are craftable in the synthesis. So make sure that you're not being held back unlocking your weapon because of these. But my strategy of how I've been taking this on is that essentially once I finish the region and I move on to the next region, so currently I'm in region 3, I'm going to invest all of my particles into leveling up the weapon from the previous region. So this weapon is from region 2 and this is the one that I'm using now, but I've been able to get it to level 7 because now I can get the particles for it much easier to level it up. So once I finish region 3 and move on to region 4, I'm going to come back and max this out, and then I'm going to go craft this weapon and use it to replace my last one, because with the extra slots from level 5 and level 6, I'm going to be able to make it extremely strong with as much quality as possible. And since I'm in that new region, I'm going to have access to the particles that I need to level this up, that I'm going to be limited to trying to level it up in the third region. I hope that makes sense, but basically TLDR, when you go to a new region, come back to the recipe recall, level up the weapon from the last region, and then use that to finish the new region you explored. Rinse, wash, repeat. Tip number 8 is going to be, don't be afraid to explore. When I was playing the game, I got sidetracked so much during that first region, and I had to be like, all right, I have to do the main story quest. I'm playing this game wrong. But if you're new to the Atelier franchise, this is going to be something that you're encouraged to do. At points in the story, it's going to force you to raise your pioneer level in that region. And essentially to do that, you have to do side quests, explore, gather things, and basically do a lot of mini quests. But you're going to be restricted for your pioneer level based on if you can progress in the main story. So don't be afraid to waste time exploring. It may seem like a distraction now, but it could actually save you time later on. And generally when I walk into a new area or I unlock a new region, I walk to as many of the main story destinations as possible, so that way I can gather everything I see on the way there. So that's been my game plan, is gather as soon as I get into a new region, unlock a lot of recipe recalls, and then start to focus on the main story quest. But don't feel bad if you find yourself getting very distracted. The environment can be very stimulating with all of the white lines pointed at everything, and so you are not alone in this feeling. Tip number 9 is going to be, don't neglect your support items. I showed you earlier with tip number 2 how they're going to be beneficial in terms of making combat less clunky and unlocking those friend attacks. But as you level these up, you're going to get the same benefits that you get for leveling up your weapon in terms of making them stronger, making them hit harder, and especially unlocking more trait slots. But in addition to that, you have these consumables, which are going to be how you heal your party while you're in combat. You're going to want to make sure that you're continuously building new ones of these as you unlock different versions of them. Now, I don't know if these unlock the same way that the weapons do, where it's a new one for each region, but what I can say is that where I'm at in the story so far, I just unlocked a new version of the items that I have, which is going to be an upgraded version. So I'm going to work to build these so that way I have the upgraded version and get rid of my old items. But with the items, when you level them up, you're going to have the option you see right there with level 6. It's going to increase the quantity of that item you make when you synthesize it. So I leveled up this one to level 6, synthesized it, got multiple, and then equipped them to my other party members so that way they had access, or if I decided to swap between characters, I had access to the items on them as well. With the items, when I synthesized them, I was able to max out the quality with the auto add feature, so I told it to prioritize adding effects. So we can see with my Luft, for the effects, I have air damage level 4 and air follow-up, and I was also able to get additional trait crystals. And so these are going to be things that you can equip to your weapon as well as your items to give them bonus effects to make them even stronger. I know in a lot of these games, it's easy to just think of the items as consumables, but I really say think of these as additional weapons, so leveling them up is going to make you even more powerful. The final tip that I have is going to be with synthesizing. We have the guided synthesis where it's going to help you and kind of teach you how to do things, but you also can use it to walk you through synthesizing something, and it's going to check mark the things that you should use to make the most viable version of it when you're inserting those materials yourself. But if you're going to use the auto add feature, I really recommend once you start to get to the late game, paying attention to how it's using these resources, because in the early game, it might be doing what is actually best in slot, but once you get to the late game where you're being able to hit 99 quality on your items, it might not be using the optimal way and the optimal route. It could be wasting resources for you. So I would say from my experience, and this could age poorly, the auto add feature has been very optimized for the early game, but once we start getting to where everything is maxed out and we're trying to make these best in slot weapons, it could be something that you're going to need to pay more attention to make sure your items aren't being wasted or the auto add feature is holding you back. I'm going to give you guys one more bonus tip, and I'm not going to include this in the actual tips because this is more my opinion. I'm not saying this is right. I'm just going to explain my logic and how I approach the skill tree. So for the combat, I haven't really invested much here. I stopped at the combat EXP 1 just because I haven't had any really difficulties with the combat. So I saw no need to continue investing points into this. I may later, but right now I'm very lightly invested in this. where I invested a lot of my points is going to be in the exploration. Now with the exploration skill tree, this is going to do things like increase the amount of ingredients that I obtain when shooting things, or just raise the rank of those gatherable ingredients that I got. And I invested very heavily into this because my logic was I'm going to need to be able to gather high rank ingredients in order to make high quality items. So it makes no sense in investing in the synthesis tree just yet until I can gather high quality items to where I actually need to raise my synthesis quality level. So once I was able to start maxing out the quality of the things I was synthesizing at 100, then I would come in here and focus on investing skill points to raise that maximum quality synthesis level. So right now I'm at 500, but earlier in the video, you saw when I tried to synthesize the weapon, I was hitting that 500 limit. So now I'm going to be focusing on getting the limit to 700. So that was my logic behind it. Like I said, this isn't fact. I'm not saying that I'm the smartest or I know what is right. That's why I'm not going to be including this as an official tip. These are going to be my tips and tricks for you guys. I know a lot of it is just me yapping and rambling, but I wanted to go in as much detail as possible. I hope that helped you out even just a little bit. But if you want to hear my thoughts on Atelier Yumia, feel free to check out this video right here where I give an honest review and go over the story at where I'm at right now. But thank you for your time, and I'll catch you in the next one.